Welcome to this Baptist News Global webinar. Here's your host, Mark Wingfield.
Welcome, Amy. It's so glad to see you. She's in Hawaii. I'm in Dallas. So it's mid-afternoon here and it's late morning there.
Good morning.
The day still has more potential for her than it does for some of us.
Yes, well, it does. Good morning.
It's a good morning for you, yeah. You've right behind you, just so someone can see it, there's the book. I have a digital copy, or I would hold up the physical copy. I've been reading the digital copy. Oh, look
Here's
at
what it looks like.
Is that a refrigerator magnet?
This is my business card.
Oh, sweet. Okay, I'm learning new tricks from you. That's really good.
Innovate, Mark. You got to innovate.
Okay. There you go. That's what I need. Okay, very good. Well, so for those who haven't kept up, Amy has landed back in Hawaii, which is home to her as well, right? And maybe that'd be a good place to start by way of introduction, just to get this going. Past meets present in your current place. Tell us a word about where you come from and where you are now.
It's like this whole big circle, Mark, because I grew up in Hawaii. My father is a native Hawaiian activist and community organizer. And when I turned 18, I couldn't wait to get off the island and, to the real world. And indigenously speaking, that's what they were teaching us at the time. Don't learn the language, don't be Hawaiian, go to the mainland, marry someone who's white. So I did a good job of all of the things and spent 30 years on the East, all over, and lately in Washington, D.C. at National City Christian Church. And I came back in February because my parents are aging and needed some support. And as I was saying to you before, Mark, I thought that I was going to come to the islands and fix everything and then head back. Apparently, I can't control the world, which is very annoying. But I've landed at this wonderful, wonderful church called Community Church of Honolulu. It's a little ethnically Chinese church, and I'm their pastor. And so I'll be staying on here for 2 more years.
Wow, that's just amazing, right?
It's so fun to be back at home. And it's like being in a place where you know the language and it's like somewhere in the back of your mind and you can just operate seamlessly because you know nonverbal cues, and it just feels like being at home. It is.
Because it is, yeah. And are any of your kids on the island as well?
Yes. In fact, if you live here in Hawaii, you want to go eat dinner at Rico because my son Hayden is the director of wine there. He's a sommelier. He's my oldest, and he lives here. The other 2 are in Manhattan.
Oh, still Manhattan. Okay. Very, very good. Well, so we were talking, Amy and I were talking before we started the webinar about this is her life storybook, or I called it Spill Your Guts book kind of thing, which is very brave and difficult to write, for sure. Not many of us could do that. But Amy, I have to confess, I probably did what a lot of readers did when I got hold of the manuscript. I was like, flip, 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 Riverside. Because if there's a chapter of your story that has intrigued more, I've noticed, I was out looking for a photo of you the other day, and I found like New York Post paparazzi photos of you grocery shopping or bringing the laundry or something.
That was me taking out the garbage.
Oh, it was garbage. I'm like, you're like, you're a celebrity of some sort.
Mark, listen, I always thought the paparazzi would be a problem at some point in my life, but not for this, not for church work. No, I think you're right. A lot of people are thinking that this is like a big tell-all and whatever. And, it's not. It's not. It's the chapter about Riverside Church is about how we feel when institutions let us down, and that certainly is not the only institution that has ever let me down. There are many that have, and I think anybody who is human understands that. You don't even have to be a pastor, although pastors especially understand it. But like your job or a volunteer organization or a marriage or whatever, some institution that you believed in really let you down. And as you know from reading my book, for me, I often conflated like God and the institution of church. And
Mhm.
so
Mm.
my tangles with church institutions have really impacted my faith. And I tried to write about that a lot in the book.
Yeah, I often freely tell people this is why I'm in therapy, uh, trying to untangle the church and the rest of my life, because I have given so much of my life to the church. And I understand, right? Yeah. So, the thing about, I think one of the things that's, again, this all ties in your book, because there's several big themes to this, right? And the Riverside story just is one point in a couple of these themes. And those themes that I'm thinking of in particular are institutional religion and dealing with change. And you're always the first female on the scene at these places, right? I mean, you're like the
I am.
women at the tomb, right? And you're the pioneer in this place, and there's extra pressure that gets put on you because you got to be the best that ever was, because you're the first.
Oh gosh. I I do write about that a lot in the book, and anybody who's been the first of anything will recognize that. But I came to be a pastor at a time when, you know, I just happened to be the first. There are many women who have had that experience as well. Um, but that also, I hope, is a theme for like you're not accepted in an institution that you deeply love and believe in because of something about yourself that you cannot change. And our LGBTQ neighbors and so many of us feel rejected by the church. And so I try to write a little bit about that. There are some funny stories in the book about being a woman, not nearly all of them that I have lived, but
Of course.
yes.
Well, repeatedly, when we talk with female clergy, we hear stories about them just being asked the most insane questions about their personal life, about their bodies, about just on and on and on. And I hear similar things from other people who are different in some way, people maybe who are a different size physically than the average person, people who have some other whatever, right? All sorts of different things that people, and the invasive nature of church work, I'm always chuckling. When I was associate pastor at Wilshire, there was a senior adult woman who every year gave me a box of her candy she made at Christmas. And one year I got a Christmas card in the mail from her with a little gift card in it. And I saw her the next Sunday. I said, "Thank you so much for that gift card. That was really not needed." And she looked at me and she said, "Well, I've noticed you've been gaining some weight lately, and I thought you didn't need any of my candy. Maybe you could use that to go buy some healthy food."
Nice. Yes. I've had all of those things like lose the barrette, or I hate your hair that way, or do you think your nail color is appropriate? Or, and particularly when I've been pastoring larger churches with formal security, like in there on Saturday, preparing for worship, getting kicked out repeatedly. Miss, no one's allowed in the sanctuary on Saturdays. Yeah. And Mark, it's funny at first, and then it's so not funny.
And then it's
It's
not.
just not funny. It's not funny. And I hope that I conveyed a little bit of that in my book, because I write about my daughter a lot in this book, because my journey as the first woman and as being a woman who has gone to one of the most prominent pulpits in our field,
Right.
and still fell off the top. I think about my daughter all the time. Like, how many of us don't want, I'll get teary, like, I don't want our daughters to have to work so hard and do so well and reach the top of their field and still, have pictures of them taking out the garbage printed in the New York Post. I don't want that for my daughter. I don't want that for other people's daughters. And, like, just get over it already. Get over it. I'm tired of it.
Yeah. I don't think the New York Post would have had a photo of Jim Forbes taking out his garbage. But
it wasn't that flattering of a photo either, to be honest. But
he looks better than, yeah, I'm going to give you some plus. Yeah. Yeah.
No, something that a lot of people don't know is the New York Post broke into my apartment building 3 times, like posing as like flower deliverers or Grubhub or whatever, like trying to get a picture of me opening the door. It was the most bizarre thing to live through.
Yeah, well, as a legitimate journalist, I want to say we're not them, and a pox on that. Yeah, that's absolutely awful. So I want to go back, but we'll come back to the New York part of the story, but I think we really can't get there until we sort of see the journey that brought you there, right? Because you started off not as a pastor professionally, but basically as a social worker in New Orleans, a social minister there. Was that because you wanted to do that, or was it because no one would hire you as a pastor, or how did that play out?
Well, Mark, that part of my story is I grew up in a very conservative evangelical background here in the islands. I would say that being Hawaiian saved me from evangelicalism because Hawaiian culture is very open and welcoming and so on and so forth. But I was very steeped in the James Dobson, go to Wheaton College, marry a pastor, et cetera. And I didn't get into Wheaton, which you've heard me say before, I'm still kind of mad about. And when I graduated from seminary, I went to seminary in Europe because you all remember back in the early 1990s, things were just falling apart in Southern Baptist life. And so I went to Europe to the International Baptist Theological Seminary. And when we decided to come back, I couldn't get a job as a pastor. So I ran a homeless shelter in the city of New Orleans, which ironically is where I learned how to be a pastor.
Wow, that's a whole sermon in itself, I think, right there. Yeah.
You know why, Mark? Because I found later in my pastoral career that everybody in my congregation had the same exact problems that the women in my shelter had. They just had more resources to hide them, to hide the reality of their lives. And if there's one thing I hope this book does is it gives us a little bit of courage to tell the truth about our lives, especially as pastors. Like we, or at least my generation was encouraged to, show up front, be all shiny, like be a good example, whatever. You can't ever be real. And honestly, I don't have enough time in 2 different people, and I've never been very good at it, obviously. So my theory is that the best communities are built when people have the courage to tell the truth about their lives.
So in Southern Baptist life, where many of us have come from, you were not the first generation of women finding their way into the pastorate and sort of breaking through that glass ceiling, but you were really probably in the second generation of that, following behind some very strong people who just had to break down walls, and Molly Marshall and Sarah, and then just so many others like them.
Nancy Zahested.
Nancy Zahested. I was like, I started down that road and like, I can't name all the names.
But there's only a handful of them, and I cannot even imagine how hard their roads must have been. I can't even imagine.
Well, so, part of what happened in that, and for anyone who's familiar with the Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 8, which is a very assertive person. I have female pastor friends who are also Enneagram 8s. and we get stuff done, right? And I'm perceived as a white male as assertive and a good leader, and people call them a bitch. It's the same personality. They're female, I'm male, I'm white, they're whatever. And that's just the bizarre reality we live in, right?
So, Mark, you'll laugh at this, but like I've been away from my parents for 30 years. So I would come home often to visit, but I've never lived near them and I've never been a pastor near them. They don't believe in women pastors. So they are just like, my father asked me the other day, people really talk to you like that? Like he had no idea. Like, yes. Yeah, like, yeah. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So after the homeless shelter, you did become a pastor in a Baptist church. How did
Yes,
that?
and they are the ones who ordained me. That's St. Charles Avenue Baptist in New Orleans. This was the only progressive Baptist church anywhere near where I lived, and so I was a member. And then I had the opportunity to join the staff as associate pastor, very part-time. I had 3 small children. And what I found there was that I just love the parish. I love it. And someone said to me, your book makes me think that you must live with such dissonance, that you have such a deep love for this institution that hurts you, but it also like brings you life. And so I think of St. Charles as the place where I fell in love with church leadership. And I'll call out Stephen Merriweather. He was my boss at the time.
Yeah.
And I was completely convinced that I knew how to do stuff better than him, which some I might have. But I was 26, so maybe not all. But what I learned from St. Charles is like, I want to spend my life with the institution. And the reason is that I think communities, like redemptive communities of people who tell the truth about their lives and the world, can actually make significant change. It's selfish in a way. It's like it's my best attempt to leave a mark on the world, to lead a healthy community.
This is one of the things that it just amazes me, the tenacity and the perseverance of local church pastors of all types who really have charge of a certain number of people and pour themselves into them year after year after year. It's not the masses. It's not like, a crusade. It's taking truly a flock of people and giving yourself in a way that it's hard to even describe what that takes, right?
Right. But I hope, so the book is meant to be a collection of stories of relationships that have changed me. And I hope it might encourage local pastors, which P.S. being a local pastor right now is even harder than it ever has been. The institution's in decline. We're being asked to do so many crazy things that we never learned in seminary, even more than usual. And I'm seeing it from this church that I'm being the interim at. They can't find a pastor. They couldn't find one. And so we're becoming more and more rare. And that's directly related to the fact that our work is so deeply, personally painful and hard.
Yeah. Well, now before we get off St. Charles Avenue, the other notable thing to me about that church is it is emblematic and has been of so many American churches that had their glory days. I mean, it's a huge sanctuary. I've been there. It's a beautiful, beautiful building in a beautiful part of town, streetcar running in front. And, it's just, it is vintage New Orleans in the way many of us think about it, right? And yet, and Elizabeth, of course, just has left there as pastor, who did a really good job for a period of years. It symbolizes what so many churches in America are facing, and that is realizing they can't relive the glory days, but they got to be something new now. And
Do they realize that?
I don't know. I'm saying hopefully, right? I don't know. Yeah.
Well,
Right?
the funny thing about my career is I would say to you, I'm a specialist in historical churches. That's where I go to work. The reason is because all the white men don't want those pulpits. And, these churches have started to decline, and we are not prepared for the decline of the church. And and this is not only unique to churches. It has happened all over different professions. Think of like teachers, administrative assistants. When those jobs were important, they belonged to men. And then when they started declining in terms of social influence and power, the women took over. And I remember 20 years ago, someone asked me at a CBF meeting, if we were to do something right now to empower the future church, what would we do? And I said then, give every woman pastor an MBA, every single woman pastor, because we're the ones who are getting the churches that are in decline, and we're the ones that are having to think creatively about what the future looks like. But now it's not just women; it's all of us.
Well, I'm so glad you named that, because this is something I've been around long enough to see. Is you have churches that maybe the glory has departed from the 40s or the 50s, and they finally reach the point where, like, well, I guess we might as well call a woman, because and it sets up a narrative for the other side to say, well, see that women pastors, they kill churches. Well, it's not their fault. The building was on fire before they walked into it, right?
That's right. But you're in the Bible Belt. I guess Texas is in the Bible Belt.
Yeah.
Like outside of the Bible Belt, like we're way ahead of you in terms of decline. So just get ready. And I love the institution, and I love the potential of healing the world that Christian communities or communities of faith have. And that's why I started Invested Faith. I'd love to tell you a little bit about that.
Yeah, we'll get to that for sure.
Yeah, but church isn't going away. It just is looking different. So it's up to us to show up where God is at work.
So I'm going to jump ahead and then we'll come back, because I know we got this chronology going, but I can't let this slide. Most outsiders would look at Riverside Church and say, well, they're not in decline. That's one of the wealthiest churches in America and blah, blah, blah. But I think, if I may be wrong, that you encountered some of the same forces at work there that you've encountered in other churches. It's just, it looks different. Am I right about that?
Well, you might know that I was in Washington, D.C. at Calvary Baptist, and I had been pastor for 11 years when I was called to New York. And the reason I went to New York is not because of the prestige of that pulpit. I went because I thought all of us are looking for a new paradigm. Like all of us are looking for a new paradigm. If any church can show us how to do it, that church might be able to.
Yeah.
And in the end, I wasn't able to lead them to that place. And, I'm an Enneagram 3. So public failure is like death to me, death. So, that was a very hard time of my life. But, churches are not unique. And human institutions are not unique. We're all made up of humans, and we're all flawed. Yes.
Well, it seems to me that, and I visited you at Riverside. We brought a group there one time, had a wonderful tour, got to go up in the bell tower, and just had a lovely visit. It was a faith and learning group we were doing, and you were very, very gracious to us then. But my observation has been that a church of that nature is really more of a business at heart than a religious institution sometimes. That it's a corporation. It's literally a corporation, right?
Yes, a church of that size is, but also as our institutions are in decline, our pastors are being asked to be business professionals on lots of different levels.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. We don't know how to do it. We know how to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because suddenly you're man, and God, I see pastors handle this all different ways, from fear and letting loose to micromanaging sometimes. What they fear, they just have to control, and others who trust wise people. And there's just so many approaches to this, right?
It's just a scary time, and as the institution declines, well, anytime change is imminent, we human beings behave in ways that do not reflect the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Now there's a line. Yeah,
I mean, anybody who's in church work knows that. And for me personally, you'll read it in the book. Like, I conflated God and church. And what happened to me at Calvary when we entered into a time of real conflict and crisis was I lost my faith. I was joking with someone the other day, like, this book is about Amy believing, then not believing, then believing, then not believing, then believing, then not believing. And usually the church is the one who ushers in both of those for me.
Yeah.
I can remember there was a period of time at Calvary we were in such conflict that maybe about a year and a half to 2 years, I would get in the pulpit every Sunday, and I didn't believe in God. And my friends tell me, like, don't say that out loud. But, like, I'm saying it because I think it happens to a lot of pastors.
Yeah.
And what saved me was I have a group of colleagues from preacher camp.
Right.
They're a group of my 5 colleagues. We've met for 20 years to plan sermons. And during that period of time, they just said to me, we're going to hold your faith for you. Like, you ask all the questions you need to ask. You're in the right place. We'll hold your faith for you. And, like, I cannot thank them enough. They saved my life. And, like, how would the world change if the church could be that if we could be that for each other?
Yeah, I think that's a nugget of gold right there. So the conflict at Calvary, was this all over LGBTQ inclusion?
No, it wasn't. It was just about change. It was just about change. And it was exacerbated. You can ask Dave Odom, though he'll never tell you he was my coach. It was all about change, and it was about me being a 32-year-old pastor who thought that the pushback was really criticism of me. And I had to learn, actually, this isn't about you. And I'll always remember Dave said to me, if you cannot get up in the pulpit and preach the gospel, then you need to sit your ass down. Let somebody else. Like, this is not your bully pulpit, and this conflict is not about you. And I learned so much during that time. It was very hard. It was hard on my family. It was hard on me. And I can remember my then husband asking me, like, how can you do this to our family? Like, how can you stay in a job like this? How can you do this to our family? I'll never forget that.
Well, and to that point, most people, apart from spouses and children, and maybe the very closest of colleagues, do not see any of this and how it tears apart clergy, right? Because people are able to use a good Southern expression, avert their eyes because they choose to not see this, and it is lonely because you're going through that alone.
Yes, and I write about my divorce in the book. It was a surprise to me, but I will say that I think one of the worst and hardest roles to play is a clergy spouse, because it's not happening to you; it's happening to someone you care about. You cannot say anything. You have to deal with people who are hurting the person you love. It must be just really terrible.
Yeah. So on that point, I mean, the divorce is one of several personal tragedies you talk about in the book, things that have just added a whole other layer. I mean, and just the work alone is challenging, and then you have these other personal issues that you weave through the story as well. And I think that's certainly so very, very human. I think so many people can understand and relate to what you're saying about there. But how do you see that part of your story integrating with what otherwise would be a LinkedIn resume? Well, she was here and she was here and she was here, right? But there's a lot of stuff in between those points on the resume.
I have often wondered, and this is terrible theology, whether my divorce was preparation for what was coming later. Because when you're a pastor and you get divorced, it's like you're experiencing personal tragedy in front of an audience. And at the time, I didn't know any pastors who were divorced. And you know from reading the book that my 14-year-old's first question was, "Are you going to get fired?" Which says something very profound about our institution. But the reason I included that chapter is two reasons. One, everybody's life is touched by divorce. I don't care who you are. Like,
Right.
You've thought about it, you've been divorced, your kids are divorced, like whatever. It's part of our society and part of our lives. But also, that chapter is not really the story of divorce. It's the story of how the church saved my life. And here I was, like, coming off of this conflict, just so done with this church. And I left on sabbatical, and I had to call my pastoral relations committee chair and tell her that I was getting divorced, like, surprise. And she said, "You have taught us how to be gospel community, and we will be gospel community for you and your family." And it was like, see, this is a chapter of the book that the audio got me, man. I couldn't record it. I had such a hard time recording it.
Wow.
But the church just lets us down again and again and again. And then sometimes, like, it steps up, and it's the best version of what it could be. And Calvary was that for me and my kids during that time. And I would cite that as a time that I found my faith again. And it was because of the people at church.
Right. One of the things I love about that story is I think if you were to go poll an average church member anywhere in America outside of DC, and you were to ask them, what would it be like to go to a church in Washington, DC? They would not paint the kind of community that you found and nurtured and benefited from there, right? But there's real people there, real church, real community, even in a place we think of as being anything but that, right?
Oh, I love that church. I mean, we went through such a hard time together, but by the time 11 years were up, we had created this beautiful, lively community that reflected the neighborhood around it. And we had our toolkit of how we navigated conflict, and we were very clear about who we were and who we wanted to be. And here's something about me that's a really bad characteristic. I get bored when things are going well. So I was like, okay, we're fixed. So let's, like, what are we going to do next? And that's when I started thinking about questions of institutional decline, because, as you know, Calvary is in the middle of Washington, D.C. They sold a block of land in the middle of Washington, D.C. for an obscenely low amount of money before I came. And that's happening to churches everywhere. And so having lived through that, and how developers are so eager to take advantage of congregations, I started asking questions about, like, what's next for us? These big, huge, like, church education buildings. What's next for us?
Well, so, that ties into another interesting question. We think so many times of churches declining because they don't have financial resources anymore. But there are plenty of historic churches in America that have sold property, buildings, whatever, or have endowments that keep them going. That money is not really the problem. There are other things. And I guess the point of my question is, how is it that you can have money and still be struggling to survive?
Churches have so much money, Mark.
Well, a few do.
No. We live with this theology of scarcity, but religious institutions in the United States have trillions of dollars. And in my work with Invested Faith, I've met so many congregations who are like, well, we got 5 people, but we have, $6 million. What should we do? And so I think it's more common than you think it is. What I found in New York was that, the large majority of our new members were under the age of 40, and they also became our largest givers. And the reason for that, I think, is because we were trying to create a place where we brought what was going on outside the walls into conversation with the text. Like, you could come to church and you would know that if something terrible had happened in the world that week, you were going to have some conversation about how your faith related to that thing. And I think a lot of churches don't do that very well.
Yeah, that's a great point. So there's a relational fabric that's really more important often than finances or buildings. And this is where a lot of it breaks down, I see, in churches. They just don't, they're not able to adapt to the relationships.
That's right. And I'm going to talk about Invested Faith anyway, but
yeah, that's where I was heading next. So go ahead. It's a nice connection. You're taking money and doing something good with it, right?
I started Invested Faith, which is a donor advised fund for churches who are at the end of their institutional life cycle, to place their assets. And then we repurpose those assets in small, unrestricted grants to faith-rooted social entrepreneurs who are building businesses that are self-sustainable and will change systems. And part of the reason I started that is because when I was in New York, I had a hard time finding the quality of clergy that I wanted on my staff. I found that a lot of the younger clergy who were coming out of divinity school were not coming to the institution. They were like, forget it. You're going to place me in the middle of Kansas at a 3-point charge and I'm going to kill myself and nothing's going to, I started this because I wanted to change the world. So I'm going to start a brewery or start a bakery or start a farm, or that's where I was finding the most compelling stories of faith community outside the church.
And so through Invested Faith, you're giving them seed money to help build what they're doing, and they're part of this community that you have, right?
Right. So I would say to you, I love the institution. I don't know what the future of the institution is going to be. None of us knows. In the meantime, while we're waiting to find out, let's not let all of this money dribble away or go into the hands of developers. Let's plant some seeds in a lot of different places and see what springs up. Because the hardest thing about being a social entrepreneur is finding unrestricted capital and having support. And so when someone comes to you and says, I love what you're doing, here's $5,000, go bless the world, it's life transforming.
Yeah.
And you've read and printed stories of our fellows who are just so amazing and really embody the heart of why I went to seminary and why I wanted to work in the church. And so until we figure it out, I hope there will always be stained glass windows and organs, but until we figure out what we're going to do with the institution, in the meantime, could we please just act like Jesus and throw some seeds around and see what pops up?
So again, harkening back to the Southern Baptist background we've come out of, and many of our readers are still involved in, and even churches that have left the SBC still have provisions in their bylaws. This is really geeky, that if the church ever ceases to exist, its property and assets revert to the local Baptist association. And I'm going to tell you, I know what that local Baptist association does with that property. They will take it and sell it to another congregation that doesn't have the resources, rather than gift it to them. I've dealt with this here in Dallas, right? Or they will do something else that does not, and yet there's this opportunity, if a church is going to dissolve, right, and they have assets, to give it to something like Invested Faith that's going to bless other people down the road seems so much more life-giving, right?
Right. So a couple of things. One, if your church is struggling, please look at the bylaws, because there will come a time when you will not have enough critical mass to change the bylaws if you need to change the bylaws. And I have a colleague here in Hawaii who's actually helping Hawaiian churches that are dealing with that, because here we have so many Hawaiian churches that own property that is so valuable. But if we don't change the bylaws, it will revert to the office of the Attorney General or to the local association, etc. I thought when I started Invested Faith that denominations would be like, yeah, this is great. Like, we need a place to send churches that are struggling. And shout out to American Baptists. They have been the only ones who have been behind Invested Faith from a financial standpoint, because I think denominations feel like they're in competition with us.
Yeah.
They want the assets because they're struggling too. I mean, understandable, right?
Right. Okay. For everyone who's watching, we're going to have a Q&A time here in a minute. Please start typing questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and I'll take them as they come in. One thing we just sort of skirted over that is also part of the book is you, like me, ended up leading a church through an inclusion process. You were ahead of us in that. I think we probably have some of the same scars from that. Tell us a little bit about that and how that shapes into your story as well.
One of the unique things about my story about becoming open and affirming at Calvary is that this is another story of the institution saving me and saving my faith, because they are the ones, the church leadership are the ones who said to me, we are going to do this. And we had just come out of all this conflict, and I was like, oh my God, please, no, I don't want to do it. We just be like, don't ask, don't tell, show up at the Pride Parade, And they were adamant. They were like, no, we're going to do it. And they designed this whole process that we lived through. And the end result of our decision was so deeply beautiful and like the best expression of what the church could be, that it was one of those situations where my faith in the institution was renewed. And I know this tears churches apart, and you guys lived through a really tough time at Wilshire, but in my case, it was one of the most beautiful experiences of ministry that I've ever had.
Well, bravo. May your number increase, right?
Yes. And I know we're going to ask questions, but like, I'm going to hold this up again so everyone can see the cover of my book. Can I talk about the cover for just a minute?
Yeah, tell us about the title too.
Well, the title is Frederick Buechner's quote.
Right.
Here's
By the way, side note,
beautiful.
my goal in life is to be as quoted as Frederick Buechner, and I'm failing.
Me too.
My wife just laughed in the next room. Okay.
Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Don't be afraid. And I've been telling this story a lot because so you can see the cover of the book has a tropical flower called the Ohia lehua. And when Random House was trying to decide what was going on the front cover, oh my God, they were like, for the target audience, we need botanicals. And I was like, well, I'm Hawaiian, so I need some Hawaiian flowers, like anthurium or something like that. And they were sending me hibiscuses and stuff like that. And so finally, I just said, can we put in Ohia lehua? And this plant is the first plant that grows after the destruction of a lava flow. So as you know, there are live volcanoes on the Big Island. And when hot molten lava covers land, it kills everything. And the first ever plant that pops up is this like gnarly little shrub that's ugly as sin. And then it has bright red, beautiful blossoms. And then if you look out over like the terrain of a lava flow and see all the dead land, you can see like pops of brightness and beauty wherever you look. And so that the cover means a lot to me. It's an ohia lehua, and it reflects my experience of being human in the world.
I love that story, and it makes me ask, is this what's going to happen in Lahaina as well?
Yes, it is.
Well, as they say, that'll preach. That's a fantastic illustration that's life-giving to all of us, I think, in so many ways. So
I know people are going to look at the cover of my book and they're going to think, oh, that's a really pretty cover. But it really means so much to me. And I want, even if you don't read the book, I want you to look at the cover and think about what your experience of human life has been. I bet it's been like mine, like really, really horrible and so deeply beautiful too.
That's just that's fantastic. I'm so moved by that. Wow.
I also wanted to tell you about my children, right?
So that was exactly what I was about to ask. Tell us about your kids.
Really?
Exactly. Yeah. The next question coming out of my mouth.
So a lot of people ask me, like, what do your kids think about you writing about them in the book? Well, first of all, they're preachers' children, so they knew from the beginning that their lives were fodder for sermons. But there's a chapter in the book about Hayden, and there's a chapter in the book about Hannah. And I did write a chapter about Sam, but the editor cut it. And so, the kids have been with me on this journey all along. They, of course, have approved everything that's in the book. Hannah likes the part where she calls me a bitch. So there's that. But Sam, on our family meeting this week, said he's boycotting the book because his chapter got cut.
Yikes, why did they cut it?
It's a really sweet chapter about being a mother and how hard it is to be about. Anyway, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, he lives in Manhattan and he's in a book club with 11 women and him, and he's like, no, we're not going to read the book
because I'm not in it. So
they've been loves about it, but there are other people in the story too, like my parents and my siblings who get things told about them that maybe they hadn't planned to tell the entire world. And so we've had to have some hard family conversations about these things.
I have to say, you're very sparing in other ways. I would have been tempted to throw some people under the bus from New York City, and you don't name names there. I mean, really. I mean, those who have ears to hear can figure it out, right? In some ways, but you keep that story, in a different way than the family story. That was my read of it, at least.
That's interesting because it feels really scary to me, what I did write, but I did leave certain things in and leave certain things out very specifically. It is not a tell-all. And I always remember something I heard Nadia Bolz-Weber say, we write from our scars, not from our wounds.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is not a place for me to bleed all over everybody and, justify my own story or whatever. It's just for me to tell the truth as best as I can tell it. And I hope I succeeded. And it's going to leave some people asking for more. It's going to leave some people really pissed as hell.
I have to say, the part that moved me personally the most, and this is probably just, maybe it will others as well, is the description you give of your very last Sunday in the pulpit at Riverside, knowing you were being forced out, but knowing the congregation did not know that was your last Sunday. And from your telling of it, the grace that you showed, and knowing the pain with the people who betrayed you all around you, and yet you chose to take what I think Hillary called the high road there. I'm not sure I could have been that good a Christian.
Well, a lot of things that some details that people don't know about my time in New York is that my candidacy sermon was preached 4 days after my brother was taken off life support. So my first and my last sermon in that pulpit were both extremely difficult. And I think it goes back to being a woman and just like everyone thinks you can't do it. So I'm going to just do it and show you that I can do it.
Yeah.
It's more me being a 3 than me being virtuous.
I would vote for virtuous, but okay. I'm in your fan club. Yeah, that's okay.
But that's like those are both extreme examples of you never know what your pastor's going through when your pastor's preaching on Sunday. You just don't even know. You know, that candidacy sermon, Jim Forbes was sitting right behind me, and I had just gotten off the plane from Hawaii. We just taken my brother off life support, and I was just like, "What are you gonna do? I mean, just got to do it."
Right. Well, and I mean, sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. And that's part of being an adult, but it's also part of being a pastor as well. Yeah. So let's just sort of wrap up with a thought or two about where's the book going? Who do you hope reads it? And what do you think? What do you hope happens to? I sort of dislike when people ask me this question, but yet there is a benefit to knowing, okay, who's the audience here?
So Random House printed this book, which I'm so grateful, and I'm lucky that Random House printed it. And we were in a meeting last week, and I said, because I'm a 3, like, how are we going to know that this is successful? And my editor said, "You finished the book. That's the success." So I was like, "Oh, thank God." Okay. But the real answer to that is I know church people will read it. But my wish is that the book has a wider audience for people who may not even have any experience with the church, but who are longing for authentic relationship and longing to tell their own truth. And they say the best way that that's going to happen is for all of you to read it and to share on social media. So please do that.
Yeah, no, exactly. So this reminds me of a question I meant to ask earlier that I failed to ask, and that is, you've come out of a deeply steeped in Baptist world, and you've been in other places beyond Baptist world, and the church you're serving now is a community church, right? Not necessarily a Baptist church.
United Church of Christ, yeah.
Oh, it's a UCC church, yeah. Okay, so I'm just curious, how your Baptist heritage stays with you. And if people ask you, what are you? What do you say?
Oh, that's such a good question, because I'll just make a public confession here. I have baptized babies.
Okay.
I just, being UCC, and one of my Baptist colleagues said, "Why would you ever limit the scope of God's grace?" And so I'm just going with that. But I'm a proud American Baptist, and I will hold on to that until I die. And ABC in particular has been so supportive of me, and UCC and Disciples have made a space for me in their denominations as well, and I'm really grateful for that. But no, I'm a Baptist. Okay. I'm just going to be a Baptist forever.
I think we often find that our sister denominations are more gracious toward us Baptists than we are toward them. And
I used to be kind of embarrassed to say I'm a Baptist, but now I'm just like, whatever.
Yeah. Well, our saying here is we're a different kind of Baptist, which is our way of saying we're not Robert Jeffress. We're something else. And that sometimes communicates with people as well.
But you'll find out, you're in the Bible Belt, you'll find out soon enough that most people don't even know what that means or care.
Yeah.
So us showing up authentically and building communities of grace and redemption, that's going to speak so much louder than any label we give ourselves.
Yeah. Well, Amy, I thank you for your time. I'm really thrilled about the book. I'm so glad you wrote it. And I know it's a difficult thing to get out. And we're wishing you the best on it. And thanks to everyone who's joined us. Just a reminder, our next webinar that's scheduled, we may have another one pop up, is with Emily Smith about the science of the Good Samaritan. You can read about that as well. Amy, your book is available everywhere books are sold. Amazon, local bookstore if you still have one, from random.
I'm on tour too, starting next week, all over the East Coast into Texas. So PastorAmy.com.
So
if you're around,
where are you going on tour?
I'm going to St. Louis, Connecticut, Athens, Georgia, Asheville, Charlotte, Durham, Dallas. Yeah, all over the place. Take a look.
And is that on your website, PastorAmy.com?
Yes, PastorAmy.com. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much for everyone. Really appreciate being with us. Amy, thanks again. Fantastic conversation.
Oh, thanks for the invitation. Thank you.
Support independent faith-based journalism. Baptist News Global.